Hello, and welcome back to A Hushed Hideaway. Today, we're going to be going back in time to talk about one of the greatest military commanders in history. Known for his battle and ambitions to change the shape of Western Europe, some thought him to be unbeatable, except for one unformidable foe, the rabbit. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, in order to understand the significance of this, I feel like we need to go back just a little bit to understand who he was if you don't already know. Napoleon Bonaparte was a French general and statesman who rose to prominence during the French Revolution and led a series of military campaigns across Europe from 1796 to 1815. Now, these military campaigns are very well thought of. He was quite an impressive and important man, as he led the French Republic to his first consul from 1799 to 1804 and briefly again in 1815. He was then King of Italy from 1805 to 1814 and the Proprietaire of the Confederate of the Rhine from 1806 to 1813. Now that's a mouthful of titles, but what did he actually do with all those titles? He was pretty respected in the terms of his military career. Some of his tactics are actually still being studied in military schools to this day around the world just because of how successful they were, except for the rabbit, obviously. His legacy endures through modernizing legal administrative reforms embodied in the Napoleonic Code. He established a system of public education, schools, abolished a system of feudalism, emancipated Jews and other religious minorities, abolished the Spanish Inquisition, enacted the principle of equalities before the law and emerging the middle class, and centralized a state of power at the expense of religious authorities. Now that sounds great, but he was not perfect, let alone very liked leader for some. Because of his wars, they devastated Europe from his looting of conquered territories and his mixed record of civil rights. He abolished free press, ended directly elected representative government, exiled and jailed critics of his regime, reinstated slavery in France's colonies, except for Haiti, banned the entry of blacks into France, reduced civil rights of women and children, reintroduced a hereditary monarch and nobility, and violently repressed popular uprising against his rule. He seemed to be unstoppable until his humiliating defeat came in part. The rabbit. Okay. Now, according to legend, in July of 1807, Napoleon's chief of staff, Alexander Berthier, organized a rabbit hunt for his esteemed master. He invited the emperor and his entourage to join him to a park that he owned within Paris and was overjoyed when Napoleon accepted. Now, he wanted to make this as perfect as possible for the fearful leader. So he started the day out with a splendid breakfast. Now, the only thing that Berthier had not been able to organize from a business property were the rabbits himself. Rabbits at the time were the most common game eaten in France, so scoring them could prove to be fairly difficult. Alexander had just gained the title of prince, so to thank Napoleon and to celebrate the treaties of Tilsit, which brought the victorious end to the war between France and Russia, he had arranged anywhere from 500 to 3,000 rabbits to be brought to the park for their hunt. Now, when breakfast was finished, the rabbits were released to the park. The huge horde started to bolt, split, and race in different directions in an attempt to avoid the attacks that Napoleon and his companions were firing at them. That's pretty normal. But this is where things get weird. The herd of rabbits converged into one large mass, turned around and swarmed towards Napoleon. Shock and fear hit the party. Berthier was super mad, immediately organized his coachmen into a battalion armed with their long riding whips to knock him back. Now, it's just rabbits, okay? Initially, the organization worked, and the rabbits started to flee again. The party considered it a bizarre delay, but were preparing to resume their hunt. When once again the rabbits turned on them, they attacked Napoleon with an unspeakable frenzy, climbing up his legs and swarming him so much that he stumbled. Realizing this was not a fight he could win, Napoleon fled to his carriage, but the rabbits followed him and climbed upon it. Eventually, the party was able to escape, and they did not go through with the hunt. Now, the reason for the creature's aggressions: Berthier bought rabbits from a farmer rather than trap wild ones, thinking a rabbit is just a rabbit. And because they hadn't been fed that day and their comfortability with humans, the hungry bunnies swarmed the men they thought were there to feed them. Now, the authenticity of this story has been debated throughout history. Was Napoleon's story true? Lucky for us, there was finally a source, a French text published in 1890s called The Memoirs du Général Bonaparte. The book is digitized by the Bibliothèque Nationale de France and is listed as being written by Paul Thibault, the general, if you can understand French. Thibault was a general who fought in Napoleon's army and thus would have had a first-hand knowledge of such a story. However, Thibault died in 1846, and many of his histories and memoirs were published after his death. In this case, the book entry tells us that the version was published by his daughter from the original manuscript by someone called Fernand Calmet. Now, while this story comes from someone who knew Napoleon and was a general in his army, it was published almost 90 years after the alleged incident by the general's daughter. This means that we have to have some skepticism, especially as Napoleon did that, highlights that Thibault had a long-standing grudge against Berthier, the unfortunate host whose park was home to the whole incident. So, did this actually happen? Was it something that Thibault made up in spite of his enemy who had died 30 years before him? We may never know. But either way, maybe somebody somewhere has dug up more history, providing this crazy story some authenticity. But in the meantime, we can just smile at the story in the image of one of Europe's greatest military commanders cowering in terror at a ridiculously large amount of rabbits and ultimately fleeing, losing the battle against the small, fluffy animals. Yeah. Today's word of the day is phantasmagoria. So phantasmagoria is a sequence of real or imaginary images like those seen in a dream. So it originated in French, early 19th century. Phantasmagoria is a direct translation from the French phantasmagorie, but its origins date to ancient Greece. It blends together the root of phantasma, meaning ghost, with agoria, meaning assembly. And in the 19th century, a device called the magic lantern was used to create ghostly phantasmagorias. The technique involved projecting a painting or an image onto a glass pane with an oil lamp. The flames flicker in the glass produces an eerie, unsettling effect. So, like today's now and age, you could say something like walking through the botanical gardens at dusk became a phantasmagoria of fireflies and flowering vines. Personally, I think it's quite a pretty word. But yeah. And this week's fragment of fixation is a newer food item that is completely vegan from Starbucks. If anyone knows me, you know I don't have a lot. I have a lot of love from Starbucks and not much control over it. And being dairy free due to an allergy, it can be hard to time to eat out pretty much anywhere. But as of late, they got a new food item called a spicy falafel pocket. Now, I wasn't sure if I was going to like this or not, but being one of the only vegan items at Starbucks, I'm like, I'm going to try it. It's not all that spicy if you're someone who can't handle spicy food, but it does have a very good flavor. It's kind of hummus-like, but not quite. I suggest you try it. It's really quick and easy for a brunch or even lunch option. Plus, it tastes really good with my iced latte. But that's beyond the point. Either way, try it. You might like it. So this was a bit of a shorter episode this week. We did miss last week as I've been having to deal with my home repaired after being flooded. But it was interesting to say the least. As always, if you could give us a like and follow or even share and a good review, it is so much appreciated. It helps get our name out there and push our podcast to other people. Make sure to check out our website for all the up-to-date information and join our monthly newsletter. One should be coming out soon, I promise. I'm just a little behind due to the home flooding. Until next story.